Hi, so today I'm going to talk to you about street photography, but more particularly street photography using the Fuji X-T1 and the setup I use. So here is my Fuji X-T1, as you can see, and it's actually fitted with a Black Rapid sling strap, which I find, having tried over the neck straps, wrist straps, etc., the best thing for my street photography, because it literally just goes over my neck and around my chest, and it's always there at my side, which I find is really useful. So let's look at the X-T1. So as you can see, it's a very small form factor, particularly because for me, I use it coupled with the 27mm f2.8 prime lens. Now 27mm, well, it would be if it was a full frame sensor, but of course the X-T1 is an APC sensor, a crop sensor, so the 27mm actually equates to roughly about 40mm. Now some photographers would argue that 35mm is probably the best for street photography, but I find for my purposes, and really the only way you can find out what's best for you is trial and error, that 40mm is a little bit better, because I find 50mm or 50mm equivalent was a bit too tight for the sort of distance I tend to photograph people from. 35-28, a bit too wide. I was often cropping the pictures afterwards and therefore throwing away detail. Not a good thing to do. Ideally, you want to crop in the viewfinder and not in Lightroom or Photoshop. So for me, the 27mm, which equates to 40mm, is the best that I find. Also, as you can see, it's got a very slim form factor. It's often known as a pancake lens, like a pancake, which is flat. And of course, again, this is great for street photography because one, it's very small, not bulky. I can slip it into my jacket pocket. And equally, because it's not one hefty zoom lens, it doesn't make me so conspicuous when I'm trying to take pictures out in the street. Because after all, we are trying to do candid photography when we do street photography. If we do pose, then really it becomes a street portrait. So that's the first thing. So one was the strap, second was the type of lens that I use. I've also bought the extended eye cap that Fuji use, which I find, even though I wear glasses, is great. It stops stray light coming in from the side, and it's just nice. And I don't find that wearing glasses I can't see all the frame. In the viewfinder I can see the whole thing. Now when I'm doing street photography, I want to make sure, unless I'm trying to get some sort of effect, that everything is sharp. So the settings I use on the camera, I set the shutter speed to 500th of a second. I will set the aperture to f2.8 because frankly with this lens, because it's not a full frame sensor and the autofocus is so good, I can actually get everything pretty sharp. So, and having f2.8 means I've got more light coming in, which means I can use 500th of a second, which means if you think of the exposure triangle, my ISO can be quite low, if you think about it with the configuration. Although in fact what I tend to do is I set that to auto ISO, so that's on A, on the ISO ring, and I've set that from between 100 with a maximum of 6400 ISO. Sometimes if I'm in brighter light I might set the maximum to be 3200 just to make sure I get the best quality picture, but as many of you know, if you've used a Fuji on this sensor, 6400, particularly if you convert to black and white, you can easily get away with. So that's what I set the three exposure settings to, 500th of a second, so I don't get camera shake, and equally I stop the motion, aperture of f2.8, and the ISO automatically corrects depending on the exposure, depending where I am in light or shadow. And I find that 9 times out of 10 I will get good exposure. Of course, remember, with the mirrorless type sensor where you haven't got a mirror, you are seeing live view in the viewfinder and on the back of the screen exactly what your exposure looks like, which is great. Now, of course, the other reason why I went for the X-T1 as against the, say, X100 that a lot of people I know automatically assume is great for street photography is because the X-T1 has this other little trick up its sleeve, a tilting screen. Now, some street photographers shoot from the hip, which is great, but of course it can be hit and miss. The great thing about the tilt screen is that by doing that, I can shoot from the hip, but see what I'm looking at. People just assume I'm fiddling with the top of the camera, when in fact, I'm of course taking pictures of them. So, that's why I like the X-T1, and that's how I set my X-T1 up for street photography. It makes for a very light, very compact, very unobtrusive, camera setup, and of course it takes wonderful pictures. So I know you won't be disappointed if you want to try street photography with the X-T1. Please give it a go, beg, borrow, or well, not still, buy one, and I'm sure you'll enjoy your street photography. Check back soon where I'll have some more tips on street photography. So that's me, Gary Perlmutter, from photographymasterclasses.uk. Thank you for viewing.